Let's please tell us about your education. Where did you get educated, and what are you currently doing? Uh, what is your current profession after retirement?
Okay. I started my schooling in Indonesia because my parents were there. My father was a doctor in Indonesia. And after that, I went to Missouri, and because my parents thought that I needed an English education, and Missouri was the place where they admitted me to school, and I did my primary school in Missouri. After that, from the Convent of Jesus and Mary, that is Hampton Court, I went to St. George's College in Missouri. And from St. George's College, then I finished my schooling. That was class 11 in those days. There was no 10 plus 2. So class 11 in St. Mary's Academy in Meerut. After St. Mary's Academy, I went to the NDA and as an Air Force cadet. And after that, to the elementary flying school. That is the standard way everybody, the standard path everybody passes. So from India, I went to the elementary flying school in Bidar. And from there to the Air Force Academy in Dundigul, near Hyderabad, Secunderabad. And from there, I went to the Operational Conversion Unit, Flying Hunters with the Air Force. From the Operational Conversion Unit, then I went to 30 Squadron, flying the MiG-21s. From there to 15 Squadron, flying again the MiG-21 BIS. Then to, that was in Pune. From Pune to Bhuj. From Bhuj back to Pune. From Pune to Suratgarh. And then I left the Air Force early on account of personal issues. And after that, I entered the field of information technology. And I've been in that field since, I think, the mid-80s. And today I design and build defense electronics and mechatronics devices. I work for industry. I work very closely with academia. I have every year I have at least 10 to 15 interns working in my students who are working with me in my work. And I write academic papers. I encourage all my students to write academic papers because peer-reviewed research and peer-reviewed papers are very important to an academic life and pursuits. So this is what I'm doing today. Majorly, I think what occupies most of my time is defense electronics and mechatronics.
So, okay, let me come a step, take a little step back. Like, what prompted you to become a fighter pilot when your father was a doctor in Indonesia? So, what prompted you to become a fighter pilot?
Ah, yes, that's a very interesting journey, actually. So, when in the hills, one of the primary reason I think that my parents admitted me to a boarding school in Missouri was that in the hills you get 3 months of vacation during the winter. Right. And those 3 months of vacations, my grandfather would pick me up from school and hand me over to the BOAC, the British Overseas Airline Corporation, right, which is British Airways today. So my grandfather would hand me over to British Airways, to BOAC those days, and they would take custody of me and fly me across to Singapore, and from there hand me over to Garuda, which was the Indonesian Airlines, and which would fly me to Jakarta, and my father would pick me up from Jakarta, and then we would fly to our home in Makassar. So this journey from India to Singapore was a very interesting part of my life, and I did this for 4 years, I think 5 years, 4 years or 5 years, and every time, those days there was no security threat, and the whole world had not yet gone crazy about security. So the pilots used to invite me across to the flight deck and get me to sit in the captain's seat And what I thought as a child, flying the aircraft. So I used to think that I was actually flying the aircraft when actually it was the co-pilot or maybe the autopilot which was flying the aircraft. And that, I think, was one of those things that got into me the need to start doing this kind of thing. So when I was in school, I had already decided that I would one day be flying fighters, certainly not a slow-moving aircraft. At that age, you want to do something faster than what you've ever seen. So that was the motivation, I think, initially. And then I sat for the NDA exams, and I got through pretty well. I think I was second in All India merit. So that was good. And I got my choice, which was the Air Force.
That's good. Thank you. Um, it's like I can see a similar story between you and mine. You have a change in career, and I also have a change in career. So what then after retirement? How did you shift to an IT oriented career? Is there a similarity between being a fighter plane pilot and being a IT engineer?
Well, yes, I would say, as fighter pilots have to have a BSc, that is the minimum qualification to become a fighter pilot, because fighter flying is a very, very complex and, technological pursuit. There are a lot of systems which need to be understood by the pilot himself, because he's the only person inside that aircraft. He doesn't have the luxury of having an engineer along with him, which a lot of transport or commercial aircraft are able to accommodate. So a fighter pilot, in fact, has an extremely high cockpit workload. He has to, apart from flying the aircraft, he has to be very intimately informed about the systems of the aircraft, including the engines, the electricals, the hydraulics, the pneumatic systems, etc., the life support systems, exit systems, because fighter aircraft are the only ones which have, escape systems. So all of this he needs to have very intimate knowledge about, because he's the only one who is the arbiter between between staying alive and not. So yes, so it was already, one was already exposed to a very technical environment. And so when I left the Air Force, that was in the mid 80s, computers were just at a very nascent stage in the world, not only in India, in the world, I would say. And I owned my first computer while I was in the Air Force. I owned my first computer in 1979. And it was a natural progression from there, after I left the Air Force, to continue along that line and gain more and more knowledge. There wasn't very much knowledge available offline. There was no internet. Online, there was no internet at that time. So one had to obtain knowledge from books, from various other sources. So I would say everyone from that period of time, I think, was self-taught. You see? So computers were just at the nascent stage. They had just kind of become available to the general public. So everyone who delved into that technology at that time was self-taught. And that's how I got into that field.
I think I also did my first stint with computer was like in 86, I remember, maybe a year back, 85, when there was Commodore 64. That was my first computer. Like I didn't buy it, my cousin had it. I used to bring that computer from his place. So I
Right.
can imagine how uh, things went from there to now. Like it's sea change. Now you don't have to pick, even if you want to learn something, you don't have to pick a book. There's internet and it teaches you everything.
Yes, yes.
Yes. Okay. So like there is difficulty like when you step out from one profession, which is like high, good paying, like and secure job, and you retired and then you started something on your own. I'm sure you would not be planning beforehand that I want to do some IT business. So how things went in that direction? Like how did you started getting clients and how things went?
Uh, well, that's very interesting. Interesting question. You know, the very first client I got, if you remember in those days, one of the very popular businesses was finance companies, right?
Yeah.
And I think almost 80% of them landed up in scams and
Chit fund,
all kinds of things, right?
chit fund.
Yes, yes. Not chit funds. They used to be called finance companies. You know, so they would have investors like you and me putting in their money, and then it was assumed that you would get a good return on your investment with them. So my first client actually was a company that had organized a kind of a lottery for all their investors, right? And the lottery began with, a set of teaspoons right up to a Maruti 800 car. So the Maruti 800 was the hot object in those days, and so this company came to me and they said, we need to organize this lottery. And the terms of the lottery were that everybody was to receive some prize or the other. So if you were an investor, you either received a set of teaspoons or you could even receive Maruti 800. Now, when I saw the manner in which they had organized and announced their program, I understood, these guys cannot do this manually. It is completely impossible to do this manually. This has to be arbitrated by some computing device. So I quoted them something, and we negotiated on that. And then I said, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the computer speak out these numbers. And they couldn't believe it. How can a computer speak? And that was the time when the BBC Micro had just entered the Indian market. The semiconductor complex in Mohali had just started manufacturing that. And I had one of those. And I bought it with a speech synthesizer. So that was a hit. And there were thousands of people who attended that lottery, and it was a live lottery, and they had a computer that was speaking out those numbers. Now this spread the word around, and my next client was a researcher in meteorology. So he came from, I think he was in Ghaziabad, and he came over and he had a set of, a huge set of data, and that data had to be crunched across simultaneous differential equations. So he told me the algorithm and I programmed it, and we were able to do that. And this is the way it began. It began with nothing at all, and by word of mouth, stuff spread, and then I entered into the field of industrial electronics in a year or two later. And that's where I've been for all these decades.
Yeah, I can understand. Like that era was nobody would have thought of social media kind of thing, and it's just word of mouth. And that
Yes.
is the real social thing. Like one client tells the other client, okay, he does good job, and it gets you the business. Not like today, what we are seeing. Like
Yes,
so,
yes.
let's come to the current. Like how is the things happening right now? Like how's your work going around now in this COVID-19 situation?
Well, COVID-19 actually threw everyone off, and everybody got toppled. I think nobody can say that they were completely untouched by COVID-19. Everybody was touched by COVID-19. So was I, and especially all the business that came in from industry, from Indian industry, that completely dried up. Industry was shut down, industry was closed, so there was absolutely no business. Fortunately, because I also deal majorly in defense electronics. So there was the period of lockdown created a pent-up demand among my clients in defense. I supply a lot of critical electronic devices and components, sub-assemblies to the Air Force. And that was a good thing that happened. And immediately after the lockdown was lifted, that pent-up demand, came back. But even today, the demand, the regular demand that I had from industry, that has completely dried up. It hasn't started up yet. And I think this is something that has hit everyone. I mean, I'm especially fortunate that I'm in an area which is critical to the nation. It is critical to our defense, and therefore it has been able to lift me out of the deep hole that all of us fell into. But that's not so. That's not true for everyone. And well, I don't know how the nation is going to kind of dig itself out of this big hole that we've all fallen into. The government has a huge role to play in this, in supporting industry, in supporting their salary packages, in supporting marketing, in supporting sales, in supporting all kinds of things. And I think the government has actually fallen short of that goal, of that aim. And there's a lot more that they can do. And in fact, there is a huge amount that they can do, and which has not yet been done at all. There is a whole lot of debtors that every industry has, and those debts are not forthcoming. And unless those debts, turn into liquidity, industry is in a very big problem. So I don't see the government doing very much in that area. And unless we do that, we will never be able to bring industry up. The major contributors to our GDP is small industry. They are the bottom of that huge pyramid, of our entire economy. And they are the ones who need the help. And what we see is the government always talking about big industry, the government wanting to spread its resources to big industry. This is that very silly trickle-down economics that we hear about. There's no such thing as trickle-down. Everything has to move from the bottom upwards. Nothing ever moves from the top to the bottom. Everything moves from the bottom to the top. So yes, I think this is a consequence of COVID, and of course of earlier government profligacy. Our government has handled the economy very, very badly even before COVID. And COVID was, I think, the last, that was the stab in our back.
So how did you spend your time during this lockdown period? Because we know like all of us were suffering and tied up in the home, are not allowed to go out. So how did you spend your time this COVID lockdown?
Fortunately for us, otherwise we're just the two of us, I and my wife, were generally at home. And fortunately, during the COVID period, our daughter and son-in-law moved into our home because they were working from home, and we suggested, that they should move in with us. Why pay rent when you're working from home? And so that was a very welcome change in our lives. Our daughter, our son-in-law, and our granddaughter were able to move in with us. So yes, and I'm very fond of reading, and I think the COVID-19 lockdown period allowed me to read a lot. I generally don't have the time to read fiction and non-fiction, other than my data sheets and various technical notes and application notes and things. So this was really a very welcome period for me to catch up on non-fiction general reading and on fiction. I saw a lot of movies, and I engaged a lot on social media. So I have a large part of my day was spent engaging with people on social media, on discussing politics, on discussing art, on discussing music and things like that. So yes, that's the way I spend my time.
So I see a lot of posts on social media and Facebook, and I see that you share a lot of jokes about your your granddaughter. So what's the
Yes.
latest in the house happening? Any latest joke from her or comment? Like I think
Well,
she comments on
she's
Nani much.
yes. So she's a delightful child, you know. So uh, she's going to be 5 on the 1st of Jan next. But you know, her statements, her witticisms, you know, she speaks. She speaks in a language which is of a child much older than she is, you know. So that is something that amazes us all the time, and every day we get a surprise from her. So it's a delightful discovery of a child's mind.
So let's wind up this interview here. We have an indication as well. Thank you for spending your valuable time. Any last message you would like to give to people around COVID-19?
Well, yes. I wouldn't call it a message, but yes, मैं सबसे ये कहूँगा कि तगड़ा रहो. You know, weather this out somehow or the other. Things will become better. Not because somebody is going to help us to make it better, because you and I, both of us, will make it better. All of us will make it better. And one message I would like to give to all Indians, to all my brothers and sisters: please, please think more about the consequences of your political choices. You know, we have made a political choice that has spilled poison into every river of India. You know, हमने अपने देश की हर नदी में जहर घोल दिया है. इससे बचाएं आप अपने देश को, अपने को, अपने बच्चों को, अपने बच्चों के बच्चों को बचाएं. You know, please save India from the poison that we have spilled all over. I think that's the only message I can give to today's generation.
थैंक यू सर, थैंक यू फॉर. ये थे राजीव त्यागी जी, जो रिटायर्ड इंडियन एयरफोर्स से रिटायर्ड फाइटर पायलट हैं, और गेस्ट के साथ अभी के लिए धन्यवाद, शुक्रिया जो हमारे को ज्वाइन करने के लिए.
थैंक यू कपिल जी.
थैंक यू सर. या मैं आपको कॉल करता हूँ अभी.